Hello and welcome to the TIFO Football Podcast. I am Joe Devine, your host, and today I'm joined by Seb Stafford-Bloor.
Hi, Joe.
And Alex Stewart.
Hello.
We're slightly unhappy because it's the third time we've started today. It's taken us a very long time to get going due to various technical mishaps. Also, quick note, there are builders around and about. I've said this twice already, so I'll keep it short. If you hear some noise, sorry about that. Nothing I can do.
It's really a man who's losing his patience.
Have you ever seen a more forced smile on anybody?
Just suck it up.
Yeah. It's good to do 3 times because I think the first time I said that, it took me about a minute and a half to say all of that, and that's about 10 seconds. Anyway, today we are talking about Everton Football Club, which is very exciting. We did a podcast on Watford the other day, and we promised to do this purely because of the Marco Silva connection and because there's a lot of very exciting things going on at Everton, or very interesting perhaps. Exciting is the wrong word, and I've started incorrectly again, but very interesting things to discuss. Another point to make is that we are recording this on Tuesday morning, the 26th of February 2019, if you're listening in the future, and tonight Everton play Cardiff, a game which you are attending, Seb.
I am.
Yes. We don't know what, we can
have a good guess at it, but look, there are no block capital responses. We should depend on that game, basically. Take umbrage with whatever we say, as long as it's not that. I think it's the ground rule.
Also we think that it's probably unlikely that Marco Silva is going to lose his job today. So we
were talking about that during one of the many interludes this morning, and we think that there's little point in him actually being dismissed, whatever the outcome. I mean, the various reports that came out at sort of midnight last night talking about sort of Everton deeming this a must-win game. Must win in what sense? In the kind of fatal P45 sense, I don't know. It doesn't seem to make much sense. But everything needs the context of people knowing that we recorded this before that game, just in case.
And for that reason, we're going to start by talking about things at Everton in a slightly more broad sense. And we're going to discuss Farhad Moshiri. We're going to talk about Steve Walsh as well, who's I think been gone for nearly a year now.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about the stadium, and then we'll get around to talking about Marco Silva, some of the tactics. Alex, we spoke about it before the podcast, and I know you've got a couple of interesting things to say.
I would hope so.
Yeah, well, me too.
I mean, I find them interesting, but
yeah, we'll see. Okay.
That was so dismissive. Yeah.
Let's start in 2017, right? Farhad Moshiri, who is currently the majority owner of Everton Football Club, increased his stake, which I believe he bought into in 2016.
2016, and he increased his stake to 67%.
Yeah, and I believe he's increasing again in the summer.
Apparently so.
All signs point towards that. Handily for us and the structure of the podcast, he also said at the time that Everton had 3 particular big important priorities. The first of which was to be able to compete in the transfer market. And at the time we saw signings like Jordan Pickford, Michael Keane, Davy Klaassen. The second was to have a star name on the touchline. Again, at the time that was Ronald Koeman. That's no longer the case. It is now Marco Silva. And I'm sure we could debate that until the end of the day. And the third was to move into a new stadium, which we can talk about a little bit later as well, because I know there's some interesting things to say there.
Yes, absolutely.
So on the first point then, Everton competing in the transfer market, we saw them spend, close to £200 million in, I think it was the summer of 2017. As far as I understand, the ownership are now looking to reduce the wage bill ever so slightly. Is that, perhaps in partnership with Steve Walsh leaving the club as well? Can you sort of get us up to speed on that, Seb? Because it seems confusing.
Okay, so Walsh comes in off the back of his performance at Leicester, which is obviously associated. We'll presumably cover this a little bit more in more detail later. But one of the successes of his time there was obviously the Premier League title win, but also discovery of N'Golo Kante, Riyad Mahrez, and Jamie Vardy. He's part of that sort of rise of the gurus movement, which kind of you probably put Paul Mitchell in there as well, the former Southampton and Tottenham director of football, who's now at Leipzig, I think. Is that right?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
So it's the kind of the belief that these guys have a sort of intangible voodoo, a sixth sense in the transfer market,
a third eye.
Yeah, and so the idea, the idea is simple enough. It was kind of marry Moshiri's money with Walsh's perception and his.
It's quite an honest idea as well,
yeah,
right?
It made sense. You know what I mean? I remember writing about this for 442. You can still dig that article out somewhere where I thought this makes sense because it's all very logical. Ultimately, what happened? I still haven't actually heard a good explanation for it. I mean,
I heard a good one.
Go ahead.
My good well, it's not my explanation. I read, and forgive me, I can't remember where I was reading this. I would cite it otherwise. But an article I was reading yesterday in preparation for the podcast suggested that some of the things that Steve Walsh did very well at Leicester, first point to make is that he was the head scout there, not the director of football, right? When he moved to Everton, he became the director of football, which meant that he was no longer able to go and scout players personally. So his job became an office job, essentially. He was based in Leicester and he had a team of scouts go and do his scouting for him. So straight away, there's already a disconnect between what his job was before.
Rather than an actual scout.
Exactly. And we know from loads of other industries that doesn't always work best. The second thing to say is that at Leicester, there was an emphasis on sort of uncovering, hidden gems, and all of the players that are frequently related to Steve Walsh, Riyad Mahrez, N'Golo Kante, Jamie Vardy, these sorts of players, were all of that form. At Everton, when he was moved in, he was jumped up a promotion to as an executive job, and asked to buy players who could, in terms of investment, get a quick turnaround. And that's an incredibly different thing to what he was doing at Leicester.
I mean, it's very logical. I remember that summer, and I remember thinking, firstly, Everton were overpaying for the players that they brought in, with the exception of Pickford, who I think everyone thought 30 million, that's the premium for a goalkeeper of his standard. Fair enough.
Retrospectively, it looks like a great deal.
Yeah, it does. And also, look, I mean, Michael Keane hasn't perhaps justified the outlay, but I think most people would honestly say, yes, that's a good deal at the time.
And other clubs would have paid it.
Other clubs would definitely have paid it. Yeah, absolutely. The only thing I'd say is that sort of in terms of an overall construction project, I think our guess at kind of the team that was being assembled on the field always looked odd. It was a lot of playmakers, a lot of a very similar type of player at the top of the field, a real lack of pace. And so, yeah, I can understand the disconnect. I can understand you got to give someone some leeway if they're moving into a different kind of job. I understand that there were different conditions at Everton and Leicester, and that Walsh was operating with a far greater budget than he ever had done before. However, a lot of his work seemed to defy some fairly established football truisms about what a team needs.
I also read that it was his suggestion to bring Sam Allardyce in, which I think it was described as what, and this is all, rumor, just to be clear, but it was described as the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of the owner's idea of who Steve Walsh was. The fact that he suggested bringing Sam Allardyce into the club was something that they felt just didn't chime with what they'd asked him to do.
Yeah, I mean,
that's all conjecture.
I'm willing to, in isolation, I'm willing to forgive that, because Allardyce, the best description I've heard of that appointment was from Sarah Winterburn at 365, who said it's the equivalent of sending out the fire brigade to rescue a cat from a tree. Because Everton had a bad start to the season and they were a mess. When Koeman left and David Unsworth was there, I mean, I remember seeing them. I went to one of their games at Southampton where they got absolutely battered by what was very limited, and still is a very limited football team. And Allardyce came in, and all that was required was a stabilising month, and it was an overreaction. Walsh's reasons for that are unclear, whether it was because of a relationship with Allardyce, potentially, whether it was really because at the time, if you were working at Everton, the spectre of relegation, whilst unrealistic to the outside world, would have been an absolute catastrophe. So I don't know. I don't know whether this was something to judge him on or not. I mean, it's something that no one's likely to forgive him for, because the football they produced under Allardyce was just, I don't have the vocabulary for it. It was just brutal.
It had Wayne Rooney in it.
Well, this is the thing. So we talk about Steve Walsh as someone that's kind of into, to buy players that can be flipped for a better description. But one of the legacies of Walsh's time there is not just this huge waste of money, but the enormous wage spend. So Rooney's gone. But even then, Wayne Rooney at that stage of his career in this league, I don't think anyone thought. I mean, it was emotionally symmetrical. It was a nice moment. It was a kind of, yes, he gets to come home. That's great. But
initially, they framed the play around him.
Yeah, they did. But then that's kind of, is he the player to frame your side around when you have those kind of aspirations? Probably not. But also some of when I was coming up on the train, I was looking at some of the wages offered to players that came in. I think a couple players on plus £100,000 a week, which the ones you expect, Schneiderlin, Sigurdsson, but also Sandro Ramirez. I think Klaassen was on north of 100,000. Theo Walcott. And these are all figures that they're not fact. They're just things I read. So feel free to correct me. Walcott is on £110,000 a week. Big outlay, not quite that much on Cenk Tosun. I think it's around £70,000. So Everton, one of their stated aims was to compete financially. And it's fine to literally do that, but you've got to do it whilst also recognizing your place in the food chain. So if you spend big money on players, then really it's got to be on someone that, for the sake of the team's financial future, the club's financial future, can be sold for a profit later down the line. Now, clearly that wasn't going to happen with Wayne Rooney. It's definitely not going to happen with Schneiderlin.
With Wayne Rooney, though, I seem to remember that Manchester United paid an awful lot of his wages.
It's true. But
I would say that financially probably wasn't much of a... I don't know. But
that's definitely fair. But the way I look at it is as deadweight loss, because you're bringing in a player who has been a fabulous player throughout his career, but who was definitely towards the end. I mean, he was on the downside of his career, and he had been for a few years. And you're bringing in a player like that who has a very strong personality, and you're building your team around him initially, which is a strange thing to do, because a new owner comes in, a new director of football, a new manager. You think, right, well, this is the beginning of a growth cycle.
A fresh start.
Yeah. Now, at that point in his career, Wayne Rooney's shelf life at that level in the Premier League was probably a season at very best. Yeah. And so it's a kind of... Yes, you can, it's easy to retrospectively judge Steve Walsh's deals and say, well, you've done a poor job. But then there are a lot of things which happened at the time which were very questionable, which look strange then, now, and are indefensible now, really, actually. Yeah. So it's a really strange one. You've got this club that are financially able to pay big wages for players, but have had this sort of long-term failure to identify players properly and to look beyond the construction of a team for a single season. I mean, teams like Everton, what made them successful in the past is long-term planning. Now, I know David Moyes was not everyone's cup of tea. I think events since leaving Everton have shown his limitations. However, one of the things he did very well was the sort of the forward planning of transfers. So there's a really good bit in Michael Calvin's Living on the Volcano, actually, where David Moyes isn't there, but Mike gets access to one of their transfer strategy rooms. And they've got the kind of, these sort of players who they've been looking at over seasons, and they've got a kind of, right, we're going to be targeting this guy in, 2012 and this guy in 2013. It's very interesting. So they did everything, they mapped everything out to kind of try and get as much value, but also to attract players at the right moment. And whilst Moyes had some questionable transfers, he did some fantastic business there. Players like Leighton Baines, of course, but Jagielka was very successful. Billy, still can't pronounce his name.
Bilyedinov.
There you go. Exactly. Marouane Fellaini. These players.
Tim Cahill,
Mikel Arteta.
We're just naming the Everton team, but they were all very good.
But within reason, sort of none of these players were more than they were at Everton before they arrived at the club. Stephen Pienaar.
You know what? I love Stephen Pienaar.
Pienaar was a name, maybe not a sort of a category A name, but sort of anyone that came through at Ajax, you think, well, you're not a surprise commodity, are you? You're a known talent. But Pienaar developed fantastically well. He got a tune out of Landon Donovan very briefly. He did good things, and a lot of that, despite his limitations.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, he was there for so long that it's easy to, and also our perception of him is coloured by what happened next. But Everton's ability to compete right at the top of the table, just outside that top four range, was based on this long-term strategy, which I feel under Steve Walsh vanished.
Okay.
I mean, it's odd. I mean, it's kind of...
Are you pinning that on Steve? Well, I'm not pinning is the wrong word.
No, I'm not, because I think whenever a new owner comes in with a lot of money and a lot of ambition, sometimes things get accelerated, and sometimes people strategists that get taken out of their comfort zone.
Because there are multiple sort of avenues that we could, I don't want to use a violent language, but lay the blame at the door of. Yeah. Obviously, the thing that is most commonly discussed in these scenarios is a change of manager, but we know that football clubs aren't run like that anymore, right? So, I mean, in terms of of that, you have the change of director of football, a new director of football, change of ownership, a couple of changes of managers. Where does it leave Everton now, though? I mean, we said in 2017 they spent an awful lot of money. Transfer activity of late hasn't been quite the same. As we said at the beginning of the podcast, Farhad Moshiri and the ownership team are looking to reduce the wage bill, understandably as well, because they spent a lot of money. They're not making it. I mean, another way, and I wish I really should have written down where I was reading this stuff from, but I read another interesting argument about Everton, which suggested that when Manchester City were bought out by Sheikh Mansour, the only three teams that were competing consistently for top four places really were Chelsea, Manchester United and Arsenal. So the fourth spot was a slightly easier grab. Yeah. By the time that Farhad Moshiri comes along, 2016, 2017, you've got the kind of revival of Liverpool, the massive improvement of Tottenham, and you've got the four big teams to still compete against. So suddenly there's six teams to fight with to get anywhere near the Champions League positions. It's obvious that what accelerated Manchester City's growth was the ability to kind of sneak into that fourth position before this occurred. So even forgetting about financial fair play laws, bringing along an owner who's got lots of money and a willingness to spend just isn't enough to break into that cabal at the top, is it? So what are Everton really expecting? And in terms of...
Well, let's take all of these bigger things off the table. Let's forget about Champions League qualification and top four and competing for silverware and look at kind of improvement of the team, a stable improvement, sort of year on year development of a side. So in May 2018, Steve Walsh was let go. Marcel Janssen was recruited from PSV. He'd been PSV's director of football between 2010 and 2018. Previously been at AZ Alkmaar, I think. And he's someone who has a reputation. His transfer record isn't spectacular. He's got a few names in his pocket. I mean, he bought Kevin Strootman from Utrecht.
Strootman,
yeah, which his career was kind of sabotaged by injury, but at one point he could have legitimately been called an elite midfielder in Europe.
I remember he was on Man United's radar for a while.
Yeah, he was a very, very good player. He signed Jorginho Wijnaldum, obviously, and that worked out very well. He brought Moussa Dembele, the Tottenham midfielder rather than the Lyon forward, to Utrecht, so he can lay claim to to AZ even, so he can lay claim to his career in a sense. When he came in, I think the wage bill accounted for 80% of the club's turnover.
It's 145 million or something, isn't it?
Huge amount for a club not paying Champions League football.
Yeah. And I think just to put that into some context, what is suggested by financial advisors for a healthy wages to turnover ratio for a football club is around 50%.
Right.
Now, that's not to say that Premier League clubs, or many of them, are at 50%.
No.
But that's the suggested
kind
aim.
of a barometer for it. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, you've got this kind of, he did an interview when he was first appointed, and he talked about two things. He talked about the size of the squad. So he said, forgetting wages and spend and, how much money is being used to buy players. He said, look, I think they had a first team squad of about 36 players. And he said, this is not manageable. And he was right, because you can't have a 36 man squad and avoid wastage. Obviously the implied direction was to trim the wage bill. But then, I mean, you look at Everton's transfer activity over the summer, and you see, you see a lot of the same issues. They've bought better. Luka Dean is a good fullback, and they desperately needed an improvement there because Leighton Baines is getting older. Kurt Zouma was loaned from Chelsea to try and cure this kind of long-term defensive problem, but yeah, a £7 million loan cost. There's no guarantee that he'll remain an Everton player beyond the end of the season, especially now that Chelsea have got a transfer ban. Yerry Mina came in from Barcelona. And that's really interesting because Barcelona,
World Cup hero Yerry Mina.
Well, this is it. Within a year, I think Barcelona signed him for 11 million euros. Within a year, and after just 5 La Liga appearances, he had doubled in value.
We had an incredible World Cup, didn't he? Did he go to Everton before the World Cup or
He
afterwards?
didn't have an incredible World
He
Cup.
scored goals in the World Cup.
It's complete availability heuristic. He scored a couple of big goals.
Yeah.
Listen, the point I'm making is that to the layman, i.e. myself, when I remember Yerry Mina, I remember, what a great World Cup.
Mm-hmm.
So,
But that is a default reason not to sign someone.
But
This
it
is
is also a
this is your
reason-
Football Manager series. I remember this.
Yeah.
You're talking about the fallacy of tournament form.
talk us through it, Alex.
Totally. So the issue with international football is that it massively captures the attention. And it's one of those things where, any club would feel remiss if they didn't send scouts to the World Cup or Euros, that kind of thing. And a player can do extremely well and as you say, massively increase their value. The issues with that, though, are manifold. So they're playing in a team for a manager, potentially within a system that is not what they're used to. There's a certain set of kind of emotional impacts that can improve a player's potential or their ability to deliver in a short space of time. Any statistician will tell you that a small sample size is basically useless. So you've got a whole host of reasons why somebody who does fantastically well in 4 or 5 games, buying them particularly at an inflated price, which is what will happen after they've done fantastically well on the world stage, is just about the worst idea. And any sensible transfer person, any sensible director of football will know that. Now, of course, there are other reasons why you might buy a marquee player like that. And I think it's something that is
And there
worth...
are outliers, right?
There are outliers.
James Rodriguez.
Right. And there are people who, someone like Thomas Müller, who consistently, or up until this World Cup, had done fantastically at international tournaments, has also shown consistently that he can do that for Bayern Munich. So buying him wouldn't have been odd, but that's because there's a whole other data set to show that he can do it in the Champions League, he can do it in the Bundesliga. So,
or in European football as a whole, just in which Yerry Mina obviously doesn't have.
No, and Yerry Mina is a particularly odd example in the sense that he is a central defender who caught the eye for late goals from set pieces. So he's not even really doing the thing well that you're actually looking to buy him for. And Davinson Sanchez was a much better defender for Colombia at the World Cup than Yerry Mina was.
I think I understand the logic, because you've got Everton broke their transfer record the year before to sign Gylfi Sigurdsson. So what you do have in that team theoretically is excellent set piece delivery. So you've seen Yerry Mina at the World Cup and you think, right, that's interesting.
Incidentally, though, are we really saying that we think that Everton bought Yerry Mina because of the World Cup in the same summer that the World Cup took place? It's unlikely, right? Presumably they must have been tracking him before that.
No, we would never say that. Janssen's whole operating procedure is investment in scouting. So he reduces the number of scouts in a club, puts more money into individual scouting.
Just sent them to watch Barcelona games. I mean, it's weird that a club would sign. It's weird that any club would sign 3 fringe players all from the same other team.
I mean, I understand Gomez. Gomez is a loan, and Gomez is a good player. Before Gomez got to Barcelona and had his confidence obliterated by a whole series of factors, he was one of the most admired players in La Liga, most admired younger players.
Who's the third player?
Lucas Digne.
Yeah. Who actually has been...
He's been
probably, well, him and Richarlison have been the 2 successors of this window.
So
Gomez to an extent.
Yeah, and but there are still... Richarlison I like. I think Richarlison's the kind of player who is young enough to potentially see his value increase, and if they should so wish, then Everton could probably make a profit on him in the future. Performance is dependent, but there are a few others in there like Bernardo. I didn't understand that transfer. I mean, they got a player in the squad, Ademola Lookman, who I really like, who is raw and who perhaps isn't someone that should be guaranteed first team football, but who is worth the opportunity. And this being a new start for the club with new director of football, new manager, you think, okay, you can... Supporters will forgive things like that. If they see a sort of a botched transfer policy of the past and they see a new manager coming in and saying, right, well, you, Ademola Lookman, you are going to play from one of those wide forward positions and we're going to see just how good you are. he's coveted by Bundesliga clubs for a reason. He's a very, very talented footballer. But I see symptoms of the past. The one thing to add in here is that sort of the great obstruction to Jansen's work for the next 2 years will be Everton have a transfer ban on their academy. So they, owing to an incident in 2016 with the sort of attempted capture of a Cardiff City player, they are banned from signing players between the ages of 10 and 18 from 2018 to 2020. And for a player who has extracted so much value in his career from an academy, I think when PSV last won the title under Jansen, half their side was homegrown.
Is his name Jansen?
Marcel Jansen.
Oh,
Yeah.
I thought it was Marcel Brands.
Fuck.
That's okay. No, we're
We need to go again.
no, we're okay. We're okay.
Don't.
I've got him confused with the old 20 midfielder.
You have. Yeah.
But you've been talking about the right person.
No, but that's I can't have that.
Why not?
It's fine. It doesn't matter.
I've been calling him Marcel Jansen for 10 minutes.
Just twice. Just twice you called him that.
Honestly. It's all good.
Seb's very upset because he said the wrong name.
That really bothers me.
But just to be clear, you were talking about the correct person, weren't you? You weren't talking about the FC20
I'm not
midfielder.
talking about the FC20 midfielder. No, I am talking about the right guy.
It's absolutely fine.
Honestly, this podcast has been through so many stillbirths. So we just need to, we've got a pulse. Let's keep going.
What do we do then from here?
Oh, we're still recording now.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, we're just letting the audience know that you're a little bit upset that you said the wrong name.
Oh, I'm mortified. That's going to ruin my day.
But it's really fine. Really.
Anyway.
Listen, the key to remember here, Seb, is that everyone knew who you were talking about. And I was just waiting a little bit before I checked that you were saying the right name.
For the knife in my back.
Yeah. I waited till the third time you
Right.
said the wrong name.
Not
To clarify, tell us who you were talking about again.
Marcel Brands.
There
This
you
reminds
go.
me of my Denver Bar mental tick. I couldn't get it into my head that he was Senegalese. Like I kept calling him Ivorian in every article I wrote about him. And no matter how many times I was corrected, it was still there.
There you go.
And also I get Dan Ashworth and Dan Ashcroft confused. So the character from Nathan Barley and the former technical director of the FA.
I've done that myself. It's very easy.
Dan
In a
Ashcroft.
way, they're both kind of the preacher man, aren't they? So,
Yeah, they kind of are, but I don't think that washes with an internet which is not that forgiving. Anyway,
that's our detour done.
Anyway, so Marcel Brands, not Marcel Jansen. His thing is academy. So
Do you know who he is?
I thought I did. And now seemingly not.
Do go on.
So the last time PSV won the title, I think 5 of the 11 sort of nominal starters were actually homegrown. Everton have a transfer ban on their academy for 2 years. So because of the events of 2016 when they tried to procure a player from Cardiff City, they are not allowed to sign players between the ages of 10 and 18 from 2018 until 2020. I'm not sure of the months on that. But so that's like, this is a guy that's been brought in to serve a purpose, and a lot of it's infrastructural and a lot of it's on a time lag. So therefore, Brands is not Jansen, Brands. I'm committing it to mind now. Okay, now. He is. You have to reserve judgment there, because if he's inherited this situation, it is not of his doing. So there's a bit of a time. You know what? I can't even remember what the question was now. We've gone around so much.
I'm just leaving you to mix in your own stew.
Just pick up the Ademola Lookman thing.
Yeah.
There's definitely incidentally, I should probably, we're going to answer some listener questions as well. I can't remember the name of the person. I will mention it later, but someone did ask about Ademola Lookman and,
so we'll go
should
back.
he be playing? So I'll mention that person's name at the time, but just to reference, just to let you know, someone's asked about him too.
Yeah. The point I was going to make, and this sort of ties in a little bit with what we were saying about David Moyes and the ability to procure players with some kind of longer term plan in mind, and also an up value in terms of flipping them, as you put it,
Like a house.
that brings anyway.
Yeah.
If you look at some of Everton's biggest transfer sales in the kind of pre-Morshy era, most of them have been at least young players. I know they paid a lot for Lukaku when they bought him from Chelsea, but he was still young. He was still pretty raw at that point.
And they were always going to make a huge profit.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And people like John Stones as well. And you look at some of the acquisitions that they've made in the last couple of years, their best ones have all been for players that are not very expensive. So Idrissa Gueye cost 8 million. Dominic Calvert-Lewin cost
1.3 from Sheffield
something
United, something like that. Yeah.
the defender who has played a little bit. I can't remember his name currently.
At least you didn't say the wrong name.
Sure. And Lookman as well.
Well, Mason Holgate.
Mason Holgate. That's the one.
Mason Holgate's now on loan at West Brom, I think, which is weird. But he was.
And that to me seems like, I mean, those are all acquisitions that I would think were really sensible and have a view in mind of saying, you know, we will, with Lookman, for example, he has the potential to be a fantastic player. So let's get 2 or 3 good years out of him. Let's bring him on, give him a first team role. We don't have the pressure of like being in a reasonably likely position to qualify for Champions League football. So we can do that by settling for sort of mid-table, maybe Europa League, kind of pushing for, get these young players playing regularly and increase their value. And that's why the acquisition of people like whether it's Wayne Rooney, Walcott, even Sigurdsson.
Walcott's the one for me.
They just don't make any sense.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, these are players.
Because it's not like, sorry, just to finish, it's not like they stopped completely doing the sensible stuff. They are also still doing the sensible stuff. It's just they're doing all of this other much more expensive, not very sensible stuff at the same time.
Yeah. Well, it's just, I mean, the Walcott thing, had Walcott been a summer transfer, I could have potentially understood it. You're sending Lookman out on loan. He's off to Leipzig, where you play very well. But you're sort of mid-season. You're thinking 6 months in. You're committing to a player whose best days are definitely behind him. You're spending a huge amount on, maybe not on the actual transfer, but certainly in wages, and you're blocking another pathway. And the same is really true of someone like I think Tom Davies is a very good player. Again, raw and someone that needs to be allowed to make mistakes, which is the currency for any youth player. They've got to be in a situation where they can come into the team, be held to a certain standard, but be allowed to kind of make the sort of the naive mistakes that go with being an inexperienced footballer, because that's really the only way in which they improve. And so Everton's frustrating because there's the hint of a really promising little nucleus somewhere, but then all these sort of these baubles which seem to tally with a kind of almost it's almost like a lack of patience. It's like the upside of an Ademola Lookman is far higher than anything you're going to extract from Theo Walcott now. Yeah, definitely.
And Walcott's a player where even Arsene Wenger couldn't really work out what his best position was or what to do with him. And I think there's 2 or 3 different things going on here at the same time, where you've got a transfer strategy that seems to suggest a need to sign marquee signings for a reasonable amount of money. We can buy players from Barcelona. We can pay 50 million for Gylfi Sigurdsson, who has been an excellent creative midfielder for other Premier League sides.
I understood that transfer when it happened.
I didn't, but okay. But at the same time, that always needs to be as well allied with a sense of footballing style. So what are we seeking to do here?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's personally why I didn't quite get the Gylfi Sigurdsson thing, but it also, you then look at someone like Walcott, you then look at St. Tosun, and who both came in that January window, and you're sort of thinking, okay, well, it seems like there's various different strategies in inverted commas all working simultaneously and not cancelling each other out per se, but having a negative impact on each other. Whereas if you stuck to one, the sensible one of which would be a more classic Evertonian, buy young, probably mostly British, sell on, that makes a lot more sense than any of the other stuff that they're seeking to do.
Alex, I also think that sort of we talked initially about kind of Farhad Moshiri's aims and talking about qualifying for Champions Leagues and competing for titles. Fans are always more forgiving if they can sense momentum. Like if you're looking down, if you're a season ticket holder at Goodison Park, even if you've got a flawed team, if you have the sense that in 2 or 3 years some of those flaws have melted away and you will have 3 or 4 really good players, then that cancels out any frustration you're going to feel about, I don't know, Manchester City being able to spend £250 million every summer. That's the commodity for a supporter.
That players are sort of players, fans are more realistic. And I speak as a Southampton fan, right? So I've had
you have to be.
healthy dose of realism. Not a Norwich fan, for all of those who commented various things under the video. And yeah, I mean, like we're going to do well to escape relegation this season. After a year or 2 or 3 under a manager like Hasenhüttl, if he sticks around, we could be pushing back up to where we were, arguably achieving a little more than we should under Koeman and under Pochettino before him. So I'm then looking at, as a Southampton fan, particularly a club that does have an academy that has produced good players recently, although not that recently, I want to see those players coming through again. And I would, I'm never going to say that I would take pride in selling a good player to a club for a lot of money, because I'm not quite that.
That's pretty cynical. That's very modern.
Weirdly sort of football managery about it. But at the same time, if I'm unlikely to have European qualification to cheer, if I'm unlikely to have a cup competition to cheer, then my pride will be in the sense that my club has an identity,
you stand
seeking
for
to
something.
do certain things and is doing those things well. And I think that the overriding impression that I get from Everton fans that I follow on Twitter, and there, oddly enough, there happen to be quite a few of the sort of good tactics and analytics writers happen to be Everton fans. And they're looking down and they're not seeing a plan. It's not even that they're seeing the frustration of the development of players who could be really good. It's that they don't know what their team's supposed to be doing half the time.
Exactly.
Or if they do know what they're supposed to be doing, they don't understand why that's what they're being asked to do. And that's a tactical point that maybe we'll come on to a little bit later. But
well, I think let's move on to it now. I mean, I was just having a flick through some of the YouTube comments and questions. I'm going to go with the democracy here. There's been an awful lot of questions, but lots of people have been upvoting and upticking as well. So we'll read a few at the top. But the first one I want to come to is just from a comment from Chris Cullen. Chris Cullen says, as an Everton fan, I just want to know where it's going wrong. On paper, we have a great squad, but since December, whenever I watch us play, we've been horrendous. I mean, these things all obviously tie into Marco Silva's period of management. I think I'm right in saying, before the Cardiff game, that Everton have only won 3 games in the last 14, only one of which was really of any significance, which was against Bournemouth.
One of them
result.
was an FA Cup game as well. So
one of the Lincoln City in the FA Cup. The other, I believe, was Huddersfield, who are rock bottom of the Premier League. So,
with all due respect, just doesn't count at the moment.
It doesn't count. Yeah. So a victory against Bournemouth aside, things really aren't going very well. Alex, we had a quick chat about this beforehand. We've been impressed in the past with Marco Silva, particularly with some of his work at Watford, and of course, at times this season for Everton, it's it seems slightly rosier than it is currently. Well, you had an interesting point about when you went to go and look at what Marco Silva was actually doing, you were confused.
Well, okay, there's 2 things to say. Firstly, let's not forget that they started the season really quite well, and they were in 6th for a while. The second thing to say is that helpfully there have been 2 really good articles on StatsBomb's blog about Everton, one of which came out during this sort of bumbling along in 6th and slightly overachieving period, one of which came out a couple of days ago saying what's wrong and how can it be fixed. So these are very helpful articles, and if you go onto StatsBomb's blog, you'll see them. The essential point, I think, is that Marco Silva made his reputation as a counter-attacking coach, particularly with Olympiacos, where he did really, really well. He actually, I think, he produced direct and at times quite compelling football at Hull and at Watford, but I don't think there was a consistency to that really left anybody feeling that this was somebody who could deliver. And it's also interesting that it's an appointment that was quite politicized at the time. I don't know if you remember, but he was one of those managerial appointments who came in, and there was a lot of, we don't want these bloody foreigners here backlash. And I think that may have at times caused people to over-egg how well he was doing, almost as a defense against that kind of knee-jerk xenophobia of certain
because they want Neil Warnock.
No, the converse. They're defending Marco Silva perhaps more than they ought to in terms of his performance.
So you get a talking head, like a Paul Merson, who I think it was him who actually talked about he played all the kind of doesn't know the league cliches in one go, in one sort of soccer Saturday appearance. Yeah. And Alex is right. A lot of people, they saw the sort of this slight increments of improvement at Hull and be like, well, proven this guy's a genius. This guy is a young Mourinho. And
and he's not a young Mourinho. So I think that may have coloured judgment a little bit around what he's achieved before. But the odd thing, if you look at Everton, is that they are a side who seem to be playing a formation that is something that Marco Silva is uncomfortable coaching, but they've stuck with it consistently. So it's a 4-2-3-1. It's very, very direct. In Idrissa Gueye and Andre Gomez, they actually have a very reasonable double pivot, and Idrissa Gueye is fantastic. He's the only player in the Premier League who has been able to match Kante, particularly in defensive stats, and that's not just recently. That's right back to when he was at Villa and overachieved in a team that went down.
He's great.
He's really, really good.
Yeah.
And Gomez, we've talked about Gomez he's a good passer of the ball. According to StatsBomb, he's an above average dribbler. So, there are aspects to that kind of solid backbone to progress the ball forwards that work. What you then get is this kind of complete confusion. And, you're playing Richarlison, who was an outstanding kind of effectively an inside forward playing on the left for Watford, being deployed as a striker. You've got a striker like Cenk Tosun, who's sat on the bench, but is the kind of, hold the ball up, wait for crosses striker that you would expect Everton to be playing. Gylfi Sigurdsson can't be dropped because he's too expensive, but he's not really doing very much. He plays a lot of through passes, but they're not keeping the ball. They're not recycling possession. It seems to be get it to the front four and hope something happens. And unfortunately, if you're PSG, that's great. That works just fine, but you're not. You're Everton. So there doesn't seem to be build up. There seems to be a disjunct between a kind of a direct counter-attacking style that he wants to play and the players being able to deliver that within the formation that he's coaching them in.
Yeah, and that's the key.
It's not working.
And we talked about Wayne Rooney before, who obviously when he first arrived at Everton, he was playing in a similar position, playing in that 10 role. We've talked on this podcast before about players like Mesut Ozil and, generally speaking, more broadly about the 10 role, which seems to be less of a thing certainly in the modern Premier League, right? And as you mentioned there, Gylfi Sigurdsson cost Everton a lot of money. And it's hard to sit those players on the bench, but you're asking them to play in a style that doesn't suit the formation, as you just said. And we know, and these things are very broad, but with a 4-2-3-1, the idea of keeping the ball. I mean, am I right in saying that the reason that players are set out in that way is when it's in the attacking phase, it's easier to recycle the ball and hold on to possession?
Exactly right? That.
If you're not doing that, and that's not part of the game plan, then why bother doing it at all? If not just to keep Gylfi Sigurdsson in the team.
Completely, yeah. In a nutshell, that's it. And the issue is that, to a degree, Everton's problems could quite straightforwardly be solved. And this is the point that the article makes, and it's the point that I would make as well, that you just bring a player back. You take the player that's in the 10 slot, you drop them back into, probably a sort of left side of midfield pushing forward.
The Pogba role.
Tom Davis would absolutely work in that role. And let's not forget that, Everton have got Morgan Schneiderlin on their books as well, who is a very, very good box-to-box midfielder. He had a torrid time at Man United, but when they bought him from Southampton, he was absolutely top. He was regularly one of the best kind of workman-like midfielders in the Premier League. And, he could presumably be rehabilitated to something approaching that level, but I would just chuck Davis in. And then, you've got Richarlison, who is a tricky, direct player who would excel in a counter-attacking team. The Lookman, likewise. And then you stick somebody up front, whether it's Tosun, whether it's Calvert-Lewin, straight away you've got the makings of a team that, playing the way that Marco Silva seems to be most comfortable playing, would work really, really well. So
do you think he's not allowed to drop Sigurdsson? The bizarre
question is, this is so, there's two issues. One is you've got a huge outlay on a player who is performing reasonably well, but by no means performing above expectations. He's getting older. He's not playing Champions League football. They will not recoup their value on him. So in order to maintain anything like his value, they'd either have to sell him now or keep playing him so that he can maintain his fitness and maintain his level. The other issue is that when you've committed to a signing like Gylfi Sigurdsson, who is not just £50 million of outlay, but is the marquee, hey, I'm here, I'm doing things differently. We're now a club who can poach really strong players from the teams that are just a little bit below us in the division. We're flexing our muscles. To suddenly bench the guy because it's not working out does make you look stupid. And it makes the ownership structure and the scouting structure look stupid as well. So I think Silva is probably really caught in a quandary here because, what does he look to do?
Here's a different question then, right? Because Sigurdsson was there at the beginning of the season. Sigurdsson's there now. As you mentioned already, at the beginning of the season, Everton were playing very well, overachieving, you put it, potentially. Currently, Everton are playing very, very poorly. So what's changed? I mean, like Sigurdsson's been there the whole way through. So on the one hand, that's an interesting angle.
They're not playing poorly. They're not really playing to much of a plan. They still have good players. In Idrissa Gueye, they have a player whose defensive abilities can compensate a lot for what else is happening.
But Andre Silva appears to think that they're playing... Marco Silva, I'm doing a Seb. Marco Silva appears
Marcel
to think
Janssen.
that they are playing to the same game plan that they were at the beginning of the season. His justification for continuing playing in that way is that Seb is opening a nicotine gum. Just do it. If you're going to do it, just do it. Come on, Alex and I aren't allowed to smoke during the podcast.
I did have a question before we moved on. Alex, we talked about...
I was just pushing him in a tactics corner.
But I'm
keep him in the corner.
I'm keeping him in the corner. It's okay. So one of my theories about the 4-2-3-1 is the importance of the one. And do you think that in someone like Dominic Calvert-Lewin,
it's about the importance of the ones.
The deeper meaning to our podcast. So Calvert-Lewin I see as a nice player, a decent Premier League footballer. I'm not sure he's quite a forward. I think he's if he was playing in the 90s, he'd be one of the two. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Cenk Tosun, a bit more rugged. I don't know. I mean, he had a great run in the Champions League before he came, and he looked like an entirely different player when he was in Turkey. I think one of the sort of the roots of Everton's malaise is the inability to the reluctance, the failure to replace Lukaku, because without a specialist forward of the right ability, then we can argue about Sigurdsson, but a playmaker, a wide forward, the proper pivot doesn't exist.
Sure. Would Lukaku work really, really well in a super counter-attacking 4-3-3 that's more dangerous without the ball than with it? Maybe not.
If he played one of those wide positions, not as a nine, probably. I'd say.
One of the things that's interesting is Paul Riley, Football Fact Man on Twitter, did a piece on Sandro Ramirez when he was signed from Malaga, and he was massively exceeding his XG. I mean, it was something absurd. Like, it was entirely likely that he would have scored 2 goals from his shots as he did the 14 or something he'd got. But he is a good link player. He's clearly quite a good finisher because he scored a lot of goals in La Liga. But, again, if you're looking for a player who can maybe drop off and allow a dynamic attacker like Richarlison to cut inside from the left, with Lucas Digne, who's a very good overlapping fullback from left back coming in, maybe actually what you need is not an out-and-out striker. What you need is somebody who can know when to drop off and link play and when to get into the box to be on the end of crosses. And Everton, the most like that kind of profile of player that Everton have is currently on loan at Real Sociedad. So that makes it tricky too.
I'm going to move us along. I've got quite a lot of questions to get to. Okay. The first one, though, relates to the sort of tactical side of things we're discussing now. A Junk asks us, why can't they defend set pieces? I know this is something you were going to bring up anyway, Alex. So would you like to talk about that now? Because it's quite a funny one, isn't it?
Yeah, it's an odd one. So I've had a look back at chances that they've conceded from set pieces from about the last 3 or 4 games using Wyscout. And There seems to be quite a consistent theme. It is difficult to tell what's going on, and I'm by no means a professional set-piece analyst, and that is a specific area that requires a lot of time and attention. However, two things really obviously leap out. The first is that they're rigidly sticking to a zonal marking. And what that often leaves is a triangle of Everton players towards the front post, with two back and one up. And that's quite a lot of players to put in that area. And what you very often see is that teams, even if they're not attacking that, even if they are attacking that area to start with, very quickly adapt and start loading up the back post instead. The other thing is that probably because of this zonal marking, Jordan Pickford seems very reticent to come forwards and claim the ball. Now, Pickford is generally a very aggressive goalkeeper. He's a very aggressive goalkeeper when the ball is on the ground, and I think that's all to the good. He's an excellent distributor of the ball as well. At corners, and more corners than free kicks, but both, he seems to be instructed to stay back quite a lot. And when he is coming to claim the ball, he's almost always having to go over one of his own defenders to get to it. That to me, again, seems to suggest that the players are being told, you will stay in this zone here. And it's a very, very easy thing for a team to then work out how to play against.
Well, on the Watford podcast, where we were talking about Marco Silva then, you told us an amazing stat about Marco Silva and set pieces.
Which I can't claim any credit for. I saw it on Twitter. But
No,
yes.
Sure. But would you repeat that?
Basically, I think the worst three teams for set-piece goals conceded in Premier League history have been Marco Silva's Everton, Hull and Watford.
Yeah, I mean, that's
in
quite
what
telling,
order,
isn't
I
it?
don't know. But yes.
So there's a problem there.
And it's interesting because, again, if you look at Everton's defensive statistics, they are, generally speaking, league average or slightly better in most instances, except in terms of the chances that they concede from set pieces, where they are significantly worse. This is clearly just an area he can't do. And I remember, I think Arsenal maybe 4, 5, 6 years ago, that when they brought in, I'm looking at you, Seb, now, because you'll know, Steve Bold was brought in to address exactly the same sort of issue at Arsenal. I think people look at set pieces perhaps and think, well, you just sort of, you pick up a guy and the big guy picks up the other big guy and there you go, but it's really, really complicated.
I was always picking up the big guy.
Sure. So, I think teams other teams have switched on. It's one of the areas where there are serious degrees that you can exploit the average level of performance to gain a competitive advantage. Look at someone like Midtjylland over in the Danish Super League. So if you're not at least keeping up, it's very, very easy to fall drastically behind and suddenly become a league outlier for conceding ridiculous goals.
Okay, well, just to wrap up on the tactics front then, what are you expecting from them? I mean, Marco Silva doesn't appear to want to be, flexible is a word we've used a lot in association with Maurizio Sarri, or is being used a lot at the moment with managers like Sarri. Marco Silva, perhaps understandably, if his system was working better at the beginning of the season than it is now, isn't keen to change too much. What are you expecting from Everton for the remainder of the season in that case?
I suspect
because he's I think in the odds of the next Premier League manager to lose their job or leave their position, at least he's he was third in the list before Ranieri went, so I imagine he's second.
Yeah, I don't really pretend to foresee what clubs will or won't do. I think the likelihood is that he will stick to that system, that they'll continue to bumble along, probably drop a little bit further. They need to arrest the recent defensive frailties and they need to start creating better opportunities. And it was noticeable against Watford, even though they lost that game, they did go with a proper striker up front. Richarlison was playing wide again. There
are changes being made.
There are some changes
subtle.
being made, but they're personnel changes rather than fully systematic changes. This is a club that really, in some, I think, going off both what Seb and I have said before, seems to have an idea of what it wants to be, but no real clear idea of how to get there. And I think that's manifest on the pitch as much as it is everywhere else.
Okay. Seb, let's talk about the stadium before we move on to some questions from the users. In the small bit of research I did yesterday, which was very small, as you can probably tell, I note that at the earliest, it's likely that work wouldn't begin on any potential stadium until 2020.
Yeah.
And also that I think even just... what was the term they used? Checking the site initially, preparing the site for building what was going to cost somewhere in the region of £100 million. So it's not a cheap thing to do, is it?
No, well, the cost has jumped up by 200 million. Originally, the site at Bramley Moor Docks was supposed to a lovely part of Liverpool, by the way. If they, as and when they do build the stadium, that'll be one of the most picturesque grounds in the country. It's for people who haven't seen it, go and look on Google Maps. It'll be absolutely spectacular, like a super Fulham. Mm-hmm. Basically,
with more or less gourmet burgers.
Well, probably more, because it's also I think 2/3 of the cost of the stadium is going to be met by Liverpool Council, and it's going to hopefully Bramley Moor Docks, I think, had pretty much sat vacant since the very late 80s. It had, I think there were a couple of music festivals or something that had been there, but little else. With the new stadium will come a whole sort of rejuvenation project. And I know that's a phrase tossed around by clubs whenever they do this, and more often than not, rejuvenation.
Legacy.
Yeah, exactly. It's very 2012, isn't it? And sort of more often than not, rejuvenation is limited to opening a Volvo dealership and a Harvester. In this instance, that's...
Hey, listen, I love a Harvester.
Yeah, well, we all do.
Come on, listen, let's,
I want more from a rejuvenation than a Harvester.
Let's be kind to the Harvester chain.
We are still looking for a sponsor as well, so if Harvester...
That's true, Harvester. I'd be very happy to even just accept a free meal when I come to Harlow.
So at the moment, one of the reasons for the delay, though, is that they Everton has decided to do a kind of a public consultation, which is going to last a year. They've just
and a public consultation to talk to the public about whether they're happy with the project or not.
Well, the aspects of the project. So there are different parts of it. One of the most contentious issues is the capacity. So at the moment, Goodison Park houses just over 39,000. I think there were quite a few Everton fans who, looking at some of the newer stadiums being built in the country, were hoping for something around the sort of 60, 65, 70 mark. Looks like it's going to be more likely between about 50 and 55,000, which has annoyed some people. They think, well, we're making this huge financial commitment, and we're moving from a ground which is still one of the best in the country. If anyone hasn't been, go to Goodison, because it's great. It's sort of rammed up against its local community. It's a great place to watch football. One of the issues, though, is that whilst Goodison is frequently sold out, its season ticket waiting list is only, I think, 10,000 in 2000, and beginning of last season, according to a recent AGM, I think there were 2,000 season tickets not renewed at the end of last season, which maybe you can link abstractly to Allardyce and, Steve Walsh and what have you. But the idea is that sort of the club they're not yet convinced about the ability to sell out a 70,000 stadium. So that's part of the consultation. I think the next set of findings, which will relate to things like architectural design, a few things that started leaking out, which are, I don't know whether to take them at face value or not, but there are a few designs knocking out there in internet land. But sort of as of the summer, the plans will be far more firm. But I think it's very important, because I think in a social sense, Liverpool's a wonderful city. I mean, architecturally, it's absolutely beautiful. Its two football clubs, though, are still rooted in their traditional homes. I mean, even Anfield, despite its renovation and I think you probably see that new main stand from the moon. I would have thought it's so big. They're in areas of the town where sort of expansion is limited, and which are not necessarily poor areas of the town, but sort of areas of town which are not really reflective of modern Liverpool. The Liverpool you see when you go out of the station and you see the big museum and the sort of the architectural flourishes.
Isn't that kind of part of the charm, though?
In my opinion, yes. But in modern football's opinion, probably no.
I was going to say that's probably one of the areas where you'd likely have a disjunct between what the club itself wants to happen and certainly what the council would want,
'Cause I know,
and
like,
what
when-
actual fans
Whenever
want.
I go down to look, walking past Selhurst Park, for example, I love how close
that's
it
the
is to
thing,
the
Joe.
houses.
Yeah, it's
what we-
Brentford as well. It's exactly the same.
Well, Goodison Park now, it's
got real charm.
There isn't a better ground to visit. It's wonderful. And if I had my way, every ground in the country would look like that. And there would be nothing which looked like the Emirates or, respectfully, Alex St Mary's, because it's kind of nowhere.
Right, so
It's
talk
no
me-
Dell, man.
Stoke, it's a sort of,
Well, talk me through it though, right? Because
Okay.
10, 15 years ago,
Yeah.
the advent of a new stadium was very important. It made a big difference to the bottom end of clubs' ability to sort of increase their financial revenues, right?
Yeah.
We know today that it doesn't have anywhere near the same impact on the amount of money that they make, partly, well, almost totally because of broadcasting income. The Premier League deals have gone through the fucking roof, and therefore over
they could play in
50,
front of empty
60%
stadiums now, and it really wouldn't matter that much,
Exactly,
basically.
right.
Yeah.
And with the smaller clubs in the league, it is it is, it's up in like 90% plus the amount of money that's coming in is coming from broadcasting income, right? With the really big clubs, where they're in the battleground now is with commercial income. So we see that. We released a video on Manchester United last week. We know Manchester City is sort of doing everything they can to try and catch up with United. The same applies to Chelsea and Arsenal and Spurs. And so why are they doing it?
There's a very interesting book by Dan Fieldsend called The European Game, and it talks about how
that's a
various
great book.
clubs
Yeah.
conduct themselves off the pitch with a view to an overall strategy. And there's a chapter on PSG in there, and PSG were a club that had a really bad hooligan problem. Ultras groups that were heavily invested in violence and would travel all the way down to Marseille to stab people and all the rest of it. And so
Marseille can't hold their own in that little
yeah, for sure. But very much part of the regeneration of the stadium and the attempts to I don't want to say this without sounding kind of arsey about it, but basically to get a better class of fan there, and this was very much what PSG was intending, was in order that it would become a kind of a cultural event rather than a purely sporting one. That then has knock-on effects in terms of the commercial viability.
This is it, right? I mean, it means
you're
making it
attracting
welcoming to the corporate class of people.
Basically, yeah.
Which is
Unfortunately,
it's very unfortunate.
You're transitioning your audience from, C's and B's up to A1s and A2s and so on in advertising parlance.
And I'm sure that the stadium will be lovely. And as you said, when it's finished, it might be one of the most picturesque in the league. And that's very nice. And I'm sure that Everton fans will enjoy attending it. However, there's something that irks me about sacrificing,
Joe,
decades of history for the hopes that you might be able to invite, CEOs of local corporations to come down and eat in your cheese bar at Tottenham
Yeah,
Hotspur.
but anyone who grew up at a certain time feels exactly the same way. But what we've come to realize is that you can write as many articles and we can record as many podcasts talking about the evils of modern football, but it doesn't matter. It's happened. And like I said, I mean, before I was allowed, I'm a Spurs fan, but before I was allowed to go to London, when I was still young, I used to go to the Manor Ground in Oxford. Absolute dump of a place. Look it up if you're too young to remember it, but I loved it. It was just really a collection of sheds. It was in its community. You actually went to watch football where people lived. Imagine that now. And I would do anything to go back to that, but it's just not going to happen. Football, the horse is bolted. And yeah, there'll be something when I go to Goodison Park for the last time, and there are people there. I've got know a couple of guys who sell fanzines out there, Cy and Bawley. Bawley looks like a professional wrestler, so you can't miss him. He's a huge hulking guy. These are people that they're part of the experience of going there, because it's sort of, this is a place, this is a community. This is not just a precinct full of Nando's and GBKs and Caffè Nero's and whatever else, cheese rooms at Spurs. It's really disheartening. And also this unspoken secret that it's all really being done transparently to make sure that a different kind of person can come to football. When you consider that the kind of person they're trying to lock out of football is the very person who has allowed it to exist up to this point, that is a huge moral quandary, which football doesn't take nearly seriously
and it's
enough.
also, you can see this manifest in the fact that clubs are so desperate to present themselves through their advertising material as a community, a special place.
As part of a day out, Alex, isn't it? It's not like going to a game.
What I mean is they're seeking to, the very thing that is being forced away from and expunged from modern football is the basis of the advertising that modern football sells itself with.
We're part of the community.
Kind of tragic irony.
We represent values which we don't care about. Absolutely. It's horrible.
Always think of the Stuart Lee as a stand-up comedian from the UK, for anyone who doesn't know, and has a great bit about the values of the Carphone Warehouse, which is it's very funny. If you're bored, do go on YouTube and look up
That's
Stuart
a
Lee's.
rabbit hole, because you just go Stuart Lee video to Stuart Lee video once you're there.
I tell you what, there's a great... Oh, never mind. Never mind.
Before you launch yourself into that same rabbit hole.
Well, I'd love to know what Everton fans think about what we've just been talking about, the idea of moving to a new stadium. Perhaps, leave some comments below the video if you are such a person, and have a view on that. Let's go to some user questions now. We asked before the podcast if anyone has anything to ask at all about Everton, so some of these are going to veer wildly through different sorts of topics. The first one, and I must indicate the most upvoted by other viewers, 218 people want us to ask this question, 219 if you include the person who asked it. Does Chelsea's transfer ban open a window for a club like Everton to drag themselves into the top six? I see both of you. So, well, Alex, you're shaking your head inside. Seb, you're shaking your actual head.
First of all, let's wait until Chelsea have appealed their transfer ban. I suspect it will become 1 year rather than 2.
That seems to be how it works.
That seems to be how it works with a particular type of club.
And then you're a big club, hold on, and then you get half of it.
Well, if you're a big club and you hold sway with UEFA, that tends to happen.
And you probably won't get a ruling until after this.
Exactly, so it's going to be suspended.
That's about to happen will start. So
the other thing I say is, and this is more of a Chelsea thing than an Everton one, don't be surprised if that transfer ban does Chelsea a lot of good. Because Chelsea's problem is not, it is a little bit their inability to sign the right players, but they've got huge infrastructural failings, which will have to be cured as a result of this. Instead of looking at the market to paper over cracks in the squad or
communication problems, even.
Well, absolutely. So maybe as a result of this, someone will say, well, actually, maybe we should have a director of football. Right. Maybe we should use some of our academy talent, and there is an awful lot in there to mine. So
maybe they should get a bouncer to drag players off the pitch.
Maybe after Sunday. Maybe
you or carry them,
or just
sign a new squad or a new manager or basically anything. Okay,
so no, basically, that's too tenuous for me.
No, also I would have thought the first aim for Everton will be to get to number 7.
The first aim for Everton is to correct the down cycle. Yeah. It's not to achieve anything in the league position. It is to feel like an upwardly mobile football team again.
But we can all understand why discussions of the top 6 and Everton go hand in hand, because for so long that's been the case.
That was them. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, and there's it's not a stupid question to ask, because it's entirely possible that it will open the door to somebody. Yeah. And currently that somebody's probably Watford.
Stinging.
But yeah, it's,
Wolves, maybe. Wolves.
It's not Everton, though. Not at the moment.
Danny Jerome. Why was Lukaku so much better for Everton than Manchester United? I feel like, Alex, you could probably take 10 minutes to answer that, but take 30 seconds.
No, I'm not sure I can. I think it's difficult to compare players for different teams when they're working under such different systems.
20 seconds.
So the system was better at Everton.
There you go. That's all I want from you. Come on. Who's
I'm
next?
not allowed to add on to that, presumably, because we've gone on to the 30 seconds.
You know what? I was so focused on getting Alex to speed up that I didn't prepare anything for the follow-up. So there you go. Oh, well, Adam, you asked about Ademola Lookman. We talked about him already. Why isn't Ademola Lookman a regular starter for Everton?
I don't know. It's an error. It's I right at the beginning of the season, I made a rather offhand remark about, when Leipzig were trying to sign him. I said, well, if you're not going to play him, there should be some kind of, I meant it jokingly, but there should be some bylaw which means that, come on, just let him go and play somewhere. And that did not go down that well with Everton fans. So, but no, I have no idea. No idea.
Okay. What do you think the missing piece is that will take Everton to the next level? I suppose we could interpret that however we like. Is it managerial? Is it player wise? You mentioned
it's a strategy.
It's a strategy.
Yeah. I like on a superficial level, some permanence in defence. Like, you know, at the moment you're constructing a team out of a player that has no European football experience really, Yerry Mina, a lone player, and Michael Keane, who is still questionable for this level, and a forward. You need a forward. You need a proper forward.
Michael Keane, I mean,
could be a good player,
I would have serious reservations about signing defenders from Burnley if you're not going to play exactly how Sean Dyche plays them.
Because Tarkowski, they look exactly as Michael Keane does now if they move to Everton at the same time, I think. Yeah, absolutely.
So, you know, I think there's a lot to be said, again, for analysing players within the systems that they play. And yes, you can look
Lukaku.
Extremely good. I'm not saying that Keane isn't a good player, but, you know, he's good at certain stuff. And if you try and then get him to do something else, it's not necessarily going to work. They need to work out how they want to play on the pitch. They then need to work out how to conduct their business in the transfer market in order to effectively support that.
You know, I'd also like, actually, sorry, as for next season, I mean, we've talked a little bit about players like Tom Davies and Lookman. I'd like to see them give Kieran Dowell a bit of an opportunity. So he's on loan at Sheffield United at the moment, and Chris Wilder believes he's a number 10 full time, wants to play him behind a forward. He hasn't played that often, but he played extremely well against West Brom over the weekend. I think... Just give these guys an opportunity, because actually, if you do, I think Everton will find out they're better than what they're importing. You know, you have the opportunity to save money. Also, I think getting that crowd behind this team is very, very important again, because there's a disconnect there, clearly. Yeah. And the quickest way to do that is to put players in front of fans who not necessarily they relate to, but they have an interest in more than just the kind of, well, he's wearing the right colour shirt sort of interest.
I think as well, particularly, again, going off what I infer from Twitter, Everton plans are crying out for the sense that the team has a style that they're working toward. And there isn't that.
I'm going to expand the question slightly. That was just our Soccer Essential 13 asks, they ask what coach would work for the club. I mean, let's just assume, for example, that Marco Silva does lose his job at some point, right? Which probably isn't that unlikely. Given the players that they have at their disposal, can you think of a coach that might enjoy taking that job on? Because there's lots of, as we've just discussed for the last hour, there's lots of positive things to take there. Lots of very impressive young players who could be integrated into the team. Do either of you have anyone in mind?
If the question was how do they cure some of their problems, I would say Rafael Benitez, but I don't see him as a fit at Goodison Park, because I don't think traditionally he's a fit for the style those fans want to see.
Also, I mean, would he go to Everton?
I don't know.
I mean, given the Liverpool connection, would they want him?
No, of course not. But it's one of those things though, Joe, isn't it? It's kind of like football clubs will always look past that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like, no, Benitez probably wouldn't go there, but at the same time, no, George Graham wasn't going to go to Tottenham. Yeah. I mean, it's just like, I don't think it works in quite the same way that it does for players. Yeah. Whether there's a sort of an animus towards him as there was at Chelsea, probably, but literally speaking, you need someone in that mould at the moment. The first step for Everton is to become harder to beat. Mm-hmm. And in the Premier League, who is doing the most with a team that should be harder to beat? Which should be easier to beat? Newcastle, I'd say.
Sean Dyche.
Style. Mm-hmm. Again, like, it's too close to the Allardyce thing. Also, I think Dyche is a more advanced manager than Allardyce, but at the same time, that's not his association. He's going to come in, and the initial reaction to anything like that is going to be to say, no, this is Allardyce Mark II. So, yeah.
Heiko Herrlich.
Okay.
Nice. Really nice on brand, that. Very nice.
Which Bundesliga club is he at again?
He was at Leverkusen.
Where's he gone?
He's just floating about in the ether currently after Peter Bosch has gone there. The reason I say that is twofold. He mostly works in a 4-2-3-1, and he's got a very good reputation for developing young players, as you can see by, you know, the way that people like Leon Bailey and Julian Brandt came on.
And I think we'll all agree
season.
He's got one of the best names in football.
Sure does.
Yeah. He was also ridiculously handsome when he was younger.
And he looks cool now. He looks very distinguished.
Yeah.
Okay. Aidan Boydlin, apologies if I've almost certainly said your name incorrectly, was Tim Cahill the best Australian player to play in the Premier League?
Pre-injury Harry Kewell. Pre-injury Harry Kewell was... I mean, a wonderful footballer.
Yeah, but
for me, over a long period of time,
did he head in goals like Tim Cahill?
He didn't, but he
was he as fun as Tim Cahill?
If you can find his outside of the left in off the bottom of the bar goal, that'll answer your
I think
question.
it depends what you want from saying somebody's the best.
I want flair, Alex.
Okay. I mean,
Most effective is Cahill. I
most
completely
effective is
accept that.
Cahill. Schwarzer.
Yeah,
Has had
I
some
mean
very good
longevity,
seasons.
absolutely. I mean, Kuhl
Kuhl was more fun to watch.
I thought Kuhl could have gone higher in the game had he been luckier. I think he was more talented than Cahill.
sacked by Crawley as well now.
Sure has, yeah.
Talk amongst yourselves. I'm still looking for another question.
Okay.
Do you
Just having a look at other.
do you like the color blue?
No, not really.
No,
No.
not really. Yeah. I mean,
There was a question in there about the 85 team and the effect of the Heysel ban on them.
Oh yeah, you want to talk about
I
that?
can answer that
Yeah,
because
go
I
on.
find it interesting. It's
Let
really
me find
more
it
my
again.
thing.
Yeah.
If you find the person that asked that, so that you can get their name checked.
Ooh, this is terrible podcasting, isn't it?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things to cut from this one, I'd say. So
Well, I mean, they'll be lucky if I cut it. We've had a long day.
Thierry Henry's free, isn't he? I'd forgotten that. I'm just looking. I mean,
I could start talking about it, Joe, and
there are
then
some good managers. There are some reasonable managers that are out of work currently.
It was Andrew Campbell. The impact of the European ban that caused Everton to lose all their best players in the 80s and what could have been.
yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I don't have a definitive answer. It's the kind of the part of football that I'm more interested in, the history of it. I think because the thing to remember is that when Everton won the league in 1985, they did so by 13 points, which is and also won the Cup Winners' Cup, which is incredibly impressive. And unfortunately, obviously, so Heysel disaster is 85, and English clubs are banned from that point onwards. And obviously, the kind of the breakup of that team, including Howard Kendall going off to Spain, can be charted against those players wanting to play European football. That's one aspect of it. What could Everton have achieved if that team had stayed together? The other is we're talking about a period of time where exposure of English football isn't what it is now. Like, you don't have a BT Sport, you don't have a Sky Sports, you don't have, well, we don't really have 11, I guess, anymore, but like, you don't have every league at the tip of your fingertips, at your fingertips. And so what are Everton as a club if realistically they go far in the European Cup in the years afterwards? What if that team stays together? And because that's
Is it the Howard Kendall era?
exactly that. So you've got this sort of cluster
I think in
of
fact we have a
players.
video about that on
We
the
do.
Tifa channel.
We have a video about his career. I mean, that's sort of the whole lead up to that. But some of the players in that team, Graham Sharp is someone who he's a good example of someone that you think he's almost forgotten about. Like, if you think about the players that are referenced from that era, they are nearly always Liverpool players that have achieved things in Europe. Now, if you put, I'm not suggesting that Pat Van der Haar would have become a legend, but, Gary Stevens, Trevor Steven, Andy Gray was playing forward there as well. This was a good team. Now, Everton's standing as a club, do they, as a result of going to European competition and knocking over some of the continent's elite, do they become the kind of side in the decades after who have all these commercial avenues that are mineable through foreign fan bases? Or do they have that kind of draw? Probably not, but it's a legitimate question. I mean, I know historically it's a very awkward topic to drag up because it's Heysel, people lost their lives, and it involves Liverpool. It's difficult, but there is a legitimate grievance about the timing of it for Everton fans. Of course, I understand that. But it's one of the great what ifs. I mean, what are, we talked earlier about that sort of that 10,000 supporter waiting list for season tickets at Goodison. What is the effect on that? Because these things, as we know now, like, Liverpool, maybe they win the Premier League this year, but Liverpool being able to sustain, their global appeal. Yeah. Okay, so they won the European Cup in 2005, sure, but with fairly minimal success. So if you put Everton in a situation where they then go on to dominate the end of the 80s, between 85 and 90, what happens next? It's fascinating.
Could be huge.
Yeah, absolutely.
I once interviewed Pat Van den Haar.
lunatic. He was at Spurs as well. Yeah.
I spent more money calling South Africa on my mobile phone than I did getting paid for it. And then the next week I interviewed David Icke. So,
I remember this. I remember you. Pat
Van der Haar was very interesting to talk to.
I'm sure he was
quite
lunatic as a
frantic.
player. I don't know what he's like as a person.
He was
but
quite frantic. I mean, I think he's had a very difficult life. Sad times for him. But it was very
Neville
interesting.
Southall. This is a good football team. It's a great shame.
Well, that was a good question to answer.
Yeah.
I think we will bring it to an end there. Do we feel like we've satisfied? I don't know if I feel like I've satisfied what Everton fans want to hear.
I'm still mourning my Marcel Janssen Brands clusterfuck.
I mean, we've done the stadium.
I've been here since
Well,
before the weekend.
yeah. I mean,
It has been. I feel a bit drained, and I haven't done anything. I've just sat here watching Joe do stuff and
it's
get
because
angry.
I required both of your energies to supplement mine as I tried to fix
we
all the
were
audio problems we were having.
a bit sharper. I feel it blunted us.
Technical vampire.
Yeah. So sorry if it's been a shit episode for those reasons.
Yeah. If you're an Everton fan, suck it up. There was no strategy, there was no planning, and we didn't really execute.
You know what? Like I was,
It's the Everton of podcasts.
But I came here this morning. Like I was proud of the research I'd done. I'd looked into Brands as. Oh God!
Listen,
I've gone through back through his entire.
I think you've done a fine job. I'm just thinking, we've talked about Marco Silva. We've got no idea whether he's going to lose his job or not, so there's nothing we can do there.
None whatsoever.
We've talked about the stadium. We got a little bit caught up in whether modern football's bad. Obviously it is. No need to even talk about it. We've talked about the ownership. We've answered some questions. I feel, maybe the problem with this podcast is it lacks the sort of cutting edge that Everton teams.
I want
Don't
Everton-
have a
Everton team
number
does.
9.
I want Everton to. I feel like the game is better for a strong Everton. I feel like it's kind of like, you know, sort of accountability in a political sense. I feel like we cannot have enough teams in the league who are snapping at the heels and taking advantage of the inefficiencies of the big beasts. Like, you need another Spurs, you need another Wolves or Watford. And Everton have been there for so long that it feels weird not having them there. Like
Are they the independent group?
Don't do that. Don't do that.
Is this
Don't do that.
broken modern football?
Don't do that. I'm not answering that. Kill
Okay.
it. Turn it off. Turn everything off.
Let's not get Joe started.
No.
Well, listen, that's the end of the podcast. Thank you very much for listening. I imagine at some point in the future, we were discussing the idea of making a video about the set pieces thing. Maybe we won't. Maybe we might do something about Everton before the end of the year. So do look out for that. Seb, you'll be back next week, I believe.
Sure will.
This should be released at the normal time again next week, which will be Tuesday morning. We're not certain which team we're going to talk about yet. So if you've got any suggestions, do let us know, and we'll be back then. So thanks very much. Au revoir.